Welcome to Metapod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of Metapod, Ron Crabtree.
So it's Ron Crabtree here, back with another episode of Metapod, where I bring in thought leaders from around the world to talk about the three common challenges that we face as organizations, particularly manufacturing tangible goods, around the forever labor shortage, digitization, digital transformation, and just the endless pressure to do more with less. That's people, resources, logistics, and the things we need to operate. We just have to become more and more efficient as time goes on. And I've got a great guest on the show here today, Jim Zelem, who will introduce himself here in a moment. And he's the author of a pretty cool book around, he calls it the Zelem Shift Trilogy, from leadership culture to prevention. But to me, the theme here in today's discussion with Jim is culture is a key to fighting the impact of the forever labor shortage and becoming more and more effective as an organization, getting a lot more done with the resources and people that we have. And I think Jim's going to share some really great insights with us around how that's possible by just thinking about our culture differently. So this episode is for you if you're tired of firefighting the same problems over and over again that seem to stem from people issues. Operations teams need to get a lot more done with the resources you have, and you got to do more than buzzwords with respect to culture and leadership, and you're looking for practical tools, not just theory, but practical things we can go do and make culture change stick. So with that, Jim, tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, I'm Jim Zelem, and I'm a retired VP with a background in engineering and industrial engineering. Over the years, I've worked across a few industries like manufacturing, aerospace, and healthcare, leading teams, solving problems and driving process improvements, But what I learned is this. Most problems aren't just technical. They're cultural, behavioral, and often created by how we lead. So that kept me, I keep seeing the same issues come up and again, because people were so focused on fixing instead of preventing. So that's kind of like my background. I've always tried to make tomorrow better. What are we doing today that we can make tomorrow better? That's kind of like my motto.
All right, awesome. I'll have some questions for you as we go, and I may interrupt you if you mention some jargon or if there's something I want to verify if I understood as we go. So that was really good. So why don't we jump right to it then? Why don't you share with us in your mind, Jim, three critical areas that you think an organization and leaders need to assess, right? Evaluate in terms of, do we have a gap here? Is there a burning platform to do something about our culture? Why don't you take a crack at this and walk us through what are three key things we should look at? Why should we look at them? And how can we put a yardstick on that and measure them?
Okay. Well, at first one is culture is built on behavior. They emulate the behavior, and that's the culture. And the risk is misaligned stated values with actual behaviors. So culture is not what you say. It just isn't. It's what you reward, tolerate, and model. So to me, you diagnose it a couple different ways. Do our daily behaviors match what's written on our walls and website? Do the leaders do the same exact thing? Do you look for examples of tolerated behavior and contradict core values? So that's one. Number two is prevention can't thrive in a corrective culture. Just like you can't build a house in sand. So if your culture is I'm fixing it, what are we doing? How do we take care of it? Then that's the culture you've established. And really what you want to do is change the culture to a preventative measure. So basically you come back and, organizationals get stuck in that way. So you kind of like, well, do we only notice people that fix things? A lot of times, we want to reward the person that does everything. But what about the person that permanently eliminates it? He's, it's not the glory guy, but you have to have people like that try to say, okay, I'm going to take this problem and I'm going to make sure at least do things to say it's not going to happen again. Okay. And the other part is leadership.
Hang on a second here, Jim. I got to interrupt just to ask a couple of questions.
Sure.
So one of the things you said earlier in this first part of the diagnostic around, culture is built on behavior, and a couple of things that I saw in the notes, which I think you may have passed by, was how do you measure the behavior of our culture? And I thought you had a really couple of great ideas here around are we measuring things like how many exit interviews are we doing and how many people are leaving and how do we stack up against the competition for, the longevity of the workforce? What are we hearing back? Are we even doing the exit interviews? Could you expand on that part a little more? I think it's important to give the audience an idea about what would be indicators or measures we could put in place to determine we've got a gap, or at least the size of the gap we've got to cope with. Could you expand on that a bit?
Sure. I think, to the culture, you have to see what they see. It's not what you see, it's what they see. And it's not what you perceive, it's what they perceive. So to understand what they perceive, communications is key. Okay. So when someone leaves, all right, ask them why. What is it and what can they do to make tomorrow better? Okay. But if they don't want to answer that question, key red flag. They don't feel trusted, okay? And they don't want to help you because they don't feel it the other way. Because it's, they always talk about IQ and EQ, okay? Emotional intelligence. Technically I can fix anything. That's IQ. But to get people to work with it, that's EQ. You have to have the emotions and you have to understand. I've learned a long time ago with a couple things, and I've learned in the experience of talking to people. I'll give you a quick example if we have a minute. I actually asked a manager one time to do something. And he came back. It was a project, it was like a 2-week thing. And he came back and we talked about it. And it wasn't what I wanted. Okay. But I asked him, I said, so Mike, what did you think I asked you? And he gave me an answer that, like I said, wow. The problem wasn't him. The problem was me. Okay. Yep. So it's the old saying, like you point the finger. Finger is blaming, but there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. What can I do to make sure this doesn't happen again? So I realize, okay, is I have to make sure sometimes I ask them, it might sound stupid, but can you paraphrase what I just said? And it's not that I don't think you understand. I want to make sure I explained it right. So I think it's very, very important that you talk about it, okay? And you go with you find out how they're engaged. Talk to people, okay? If you even just go out on the floor, quick measurement. Hey, how's it going today? What's going on? If they don't want to engage, you don't have a great culture and you have some issues with leadership, okay? Because to me, leadership is a position. That's why the book is Put the Leader in Leadership. Okay. People listen to leaders. So I hope that answers your question there, Ron.
No, you're definitely getting there. And it just reminds me, I've done hundreds of organizational assessments, and one of my mentors from over 20 years ago really taught me the value of just asking questions, So one of my favorite things for working with manufacturing companies, go to the floor, walk around, talk to the operators. And I would ask them, just a couple basic things. You start out with how you doing today and what's going on, what kind of a day you have, and et cetera. And then I would ask them, so how do you know if you're doing a good job or not? And just sit back and listen.
Yeah.
To what they're talking about, because there'll be volumes around, how well do we communicate? Do we have good SOPs? Do they have support? Do they get feedback about performance on a regular basis, or they just don't know? If they don't know, that's a red flag.
And someone would say that.
Favorite question,
I don't know.
what makes you crazy?
Yeah.
My other favorite question is, what makes you crazy? What happens every day that frustrates you and wishes maybe you could find another place to work? And just, again, be very quiet and listen. What are they talking about? Is it the fact that my bosses aren't paying attention, or is it because my break times aren't long enough, or it's too hot? Or right? And what their answers are was very, very telling around, the culture and also the type of environment we have, which kind of leads me to another question. And I think it really gets at your second diagnostic around you can't survive in a correction culture. And one of the things that occurred to me as I was listening is then when you're working down through this, I've always seen it as when we talk about conflict, right? Things aren't going the way we'd like them, that I see the two major sources for that. And I'm curious whether this has been your experience. There's process driven conflict. In other words, functionally, accounting is going to do battle with purchasing because accounting wants the prices to go down, purchasing needs to get supply at any cost, right?
Right.
So there's process driven or functional conflict, which relates back to culture, by the way. And then there's actual person to person conflict. We're not getting along because I just plain don't like you. I just plain don't trust you. Right. So there's process driven or organizational design driven. And then there's actual people driven where it's based on relationships being the conflict. Has that been your experience? Is that part of what you would look for?
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. I actually look for that second one first. I think if you get rid of the personal conflicts and you build trust, which is very tough to do because trust, you can be honest with somebody, which is, good, but trust is an emotion. If I don't trust you, I'm not going to help you. So you have to build that trust. And, you got to be, and also a manager told me this many years ago, and I stuck with this for my whole life. He told me, don't be quick to promise, but be quick to deliver. And I stuck by that rule. Okay. They might not like what I've promised them, but they know whatever I promise them, I will deliver. Okay. And I think that's super important. Once you start building that communications and people start working together, okay, and they start believing in each other, that really takes a good hold on the situation and the technical issues become a little easier because they're going to even really work with you too now. Okay.
Right.
It's pretty tough to work on the technical issues between departments when they don't want to work together because in departments, from department to department, as you would talk about purchasing and everything else, those are silos. Okay. Those are silos that you made. Specialization made those silos, which is good. But you have to integrate those silos to talk to each other. It's almost like that customer vendor relationship. What do you need from me to be successful? Okay. Vice versa. And if they take care of their needs, things go smoother a little bit. And again, it comes back to, it's people. And that is where a lot of, I'll go with managers, have trouble with the people because they have to understand the leadership skills. Like you even talk about culture. Well, how did that happen? How do we fix it? No, that's not the right question. The question is, well, gee, how you got any ideas how we can prevent this? That's changing culture and that's becoming a leader. So,
Yep, I like that a lot. In fact, one of the questions I used to like to ask if we were doing, more of an in-depth dive into, what people thought about each other is we're just asking the level of teamwork and cooperation between them, their boss, them and their peers, them and their underlings, and then across functions. And where they gave a number that wasn't good, we'd always have a follow-up question. Oh, that's interesting. What would be different in the future that caused you to give a higher number? So we wouldn't try to tell them the answer, right? Or make any assumptions. We say, okay, you feel like on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being bad, 5 being couldn't be better, and you're giving it a 3. It's like, okay, it's not perfect. What would be different in the future if I ask you that question 6 months from now, and if you were going to upgrade the number, give it a 4, for example, what is it that would be different? And what's useful about that kind of technique is it's a way to measure, in some level, what people's perceptions are. And you said it correctly. It's what they perceive is their reality, right? Have you had success using that kind of a technique to get a baseline, or if you have been successful using other techniques to kind of put a measurement to some of these things?
well, to put a measurement, I tend to, I guess, for measurement, I tend to, by this, shoot from the hip a little bit. I watch the reactions. Okay. I'll ask them how things are going. And, I have found out in a couple of things, ask them, well, have you, even have you tried this? And I said, hey, even as when I was upper level a little bit, I used to go back there. Have you talked to your manager or your supervisor about that? I said, because that's an excellent idea. And I watched that reaction. So basically, a lot of times I found out that, well, it's not them, it's their coach. Okay. So now I'm not going to, knock the manager down or anything like that. I'm going to try to coach them and tell them, you know what, now that you're a manager, it's not what you can do. It has nothing to do with what you can do. It's what your team can do. If your team can't do it, they'll make you look like a hero or they'll make you look like an idiot. Which one do you want to make you look like? Okay. And that's how I feel. Okay. But see, I go to that run and I might be going off on a tangent with you. Okay. But I really relate this team building to sports. Okay.
Right.
I'm a football nut. I rep football for 18 years. Okay. And I know how the players emulate their coaches. Okay. And, a coach can make a team so good. They really, really can. Okay. How do you coach them? How do you do this? How do you do this? You mold them. You get the trust involved in there, the personality involved. But guess what? You can't play the game. Okay. So help your team win.
That's cool. So I think we're going to move on then to, kind of this third diagnostic. We talked about, culture being built on behavior. We talked a little bit about, prevention can't solve anything, right? You've got to get out in front of it. And I think the third area you want to get into is another nuance, kind of this third area around leadership being earned. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yes, I will. Leadership has to be earned. It's not appointed. Okay. But leadership is a role. So that's why I say if you want to become a leadership, okay, you have to earn that. Okay. If you lack trust, you're not present, you're not helping them, you're not following through, then you're a manager in a leadership role. You're not a leader. Okay. You need to help your team like we were talking about. Okay. People don't follow titles. Okay. They follow people. I mean, and you can go back to the word one. People, why do they join a cult? Because they believe in them. I'm not saying cults are good. I'm just saying they get followers. Okay. You know what? To be a leader, if no one's following you, you're not a leader. Okay. You have to follow somebody. And once you start getting followers, it kind of like multiplies itself because now the followers talk to their cohorts and they start following even more. Okay. So you have to, if you have to earn their credibility, and engage and talk to them. Okay. For example, do people really bring their problems to you? Okay. And, you talk to them, you see about the team retention. Okay. I'll give you a little example in the manufacturing. We were building the Honda clocks for the Honda Accord. And we had this old system and it was BATS mode. I'm going back a few years, okay? But it's going to give a good leadership thing, okay? And they used to batch all this stuff. They had to make 1,200 clocks every day. Couldn't do it. We had to work overtime. So I will give this industrial engineer, he came up with a beautiful plan. There was like 12 people on the line and it was a slide line. You do this, you do this, you do this. He did it real good, but he couldn't fine tune it because what would happen is, you have parts, you got tolerance stack ups or whatever. Pieces don't always fit together right. So he would come out there in the morning, or you do this, and he changed everything. And then in the afternoon, it wasn't working. So he would change it again. So they actually came up to me one day and they said, Jim, we can't get it, but we know how to get there. I said, we'll call the person Mark. I said, did you talk to Mark? Yeah. Well, did he listen to you? No. So I said, okay, here's the deal. I said, I'm going to keep Mark away tomorrow in the morning. I says, from 7 to 11, he won't be there. I says, Honda owns the process. So you can't change the process, but you can change who does what. and you can keep changing it all day long. So I'm going to give you 4 hours, and you have to give me 600 clocks. And guess what? They did. Okay. And you know what happened? Mark got mad. His ego got in his way. And when I tried to tell him, Mark, you had an excellent, excellent plan. Let the people fine tune it because they live with the problems. You don't. Remember, as a leader, you live with the results of the problems. You don't live with the problems. So if you really want to get to the problems, we go back to communications. Talk to the people. Go out there and, like you said, listen. 2 ears, 1 mouth. Listen more than you talk.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's great advice. So one of the things you talked about here was evaluating feedback loops and upward evaluations. What do you mean by all that? That sounds like that's something we should be evaluating and benchmarking a little bit.
Well, you're right. You should evaluate feedback loops. Are you getting feedback loops? Are you actually people talking? Are your other leaders that might be reporting to you or something like that? Are you communicating with them? Okay, get feedback. I mean, I never went in. I would always talk to the managers at least once a week. Well, it wasn't always about the technical issues. It was okay. So what have we done to make tomorrow better? What have you learned from your team? Okay, and so the feedback. Do you understand what's going on? And some of the times I would actually ask a manager, I says, do me a favor, flow chart your process. And if you can't flow chart it, then you don't understand it. Okay. Because it shows all the little problems. When you start making a map, and I would say, well, what happens if this goes wrong? Well, I don't know. Well, then I want you to go back and talk to your team and find out, hey, what are we doing? Okay, be proactive with the team. Too many people want so that's when I talk about the feedback loops. Okay. And I always come back and ask them, and actually, I'm sure a lot of people do that now. When I have to give the reviewer everything, I always ask them, and I says, review me. Okay. Am I giving you what you want to succeed? Because I know I can be part of your problem, and I want to eliminate that. So that's how I see the feedback loops.
All right. Very cool. Thank you. So this is a lot of really good stuff. I think you build a bit of a learning platform because if we don't have really clear yes answers and clarity around how we're performing in these various areas, it's not easy for us to say, hey, we're doing good there. But wait a minute, we got room for improvement. And certainly, if you're seeing a lot of turnover of the workforce, people clamming up in meetings because they're scared to say anything, that's a massive red flag, if that's going on. So, Jim, let's pivot now. Let's pretend that the audience is listening to this like, yep, we definitely have some gaps. There's things we could do differently or better. Now, I know you touched on several things already, but what could we go do? What's the go do, the actions? What should we do to close the gap on these challenges?
To close the gap on the challenges in my book, again, is, I'm going to simplify it down to one word: communications. Okay. You need to communicate. And I don't care if you're a VP. I don't care if you're a director. Okay. Go out there and find out what's going on. You know what? They're not going to open up to you because they don't trust you. Why would they trust you? Okay. But you want them to trust you. Well, why? Why would go out there? I think the first thing is to do that, to improve, find out what trust is. Okay. And like I said, communicate to the people. Go talk to them. Find out, hey, you know what, Sally, what's your biggest problem today? What's going on? How can I help you? Okay. I would do that. And they might come back, well, you're a director. They might not talk to you. Okay. But eventually they will. But I do think if you want to improve and you want to get it, a good thing is get out of your office. Go talk to the staff. Okay. Go talk to the doers. Okay. Find out their issues. Because like I told you in the beginning, you live with the results of the problems and you want to change those results. I'm with you because I do too. But guess what? You can't do it. You do it, and you can maybe do one problem a day. But if I can get 100 people to do it, I can do 100 problems a day. So again, That's why I say this is not an overnight thing. If you want to change a culture, cultures take time. Do not think in 1 week your culture is going to change, because they still don't trust you. This is an evolution that you're constantly going to do, and constantly you as yourself have to change to make that change. And if you don't want to change, then the gaps you see, you might close them a little bit, but you're not going to really turn them over.
Yeah, that's really good. And I'm just thinking, culture, every organization has one, right? And as leaders, it's get to make a choice, right? Culture is just going to happen in a feral fashion on its own. It just evolves, right?
Right.
Or we get to decide what we want the culture to be, and then consciously put down the building blocks and start building out, to your point, the behaviors, what we're doing, how we do it, and what that ideal behavior of the leader looks like that actually exemplifies the culture. I think is spot on. So I'm really grateful for that. What else
And
should we
just
be doing for change?
ask a lot of questions.
Okay.
A- He or she who asks the most questions controls the conversation. Okay. And make sure, you know what, like I said, go out there and ask questions. Okay. Why do they do what they do? Okay. I mean, if that would be a great input. I mean, I would go back and say, that, as I started building it, it's more the questions. You want to change the culture, change your questions. Well, why did that happen? Well, what kind of culture did you just enforce? A corrective culture. Instead of saying, wow, yeah, well, you got any ideas of how we can prevent that from happening again? That's changing the culture. Okay. Just remember, we're not going to blame. We're going to figure out the situation and ask the right questions. And slowly they will, if you come back and listen to them and you help them resolve their issues, you will build trust. And once you build trust, you'll start building a team. And once you start building a team, you have synergy. And synergy, you know what? I mean, putting it all together is bigger than putting all the pieces together.
It is. It is. I wonder if somewhere in the mix, one of the things I've admired about, I'll call it the Toyota production system, which was born from, initiatives by the U.S. government, manufacturing industry, getting out the exact jargon on, but a lot of the things that Deming and Duran and some of those guys took Japan back in the 50s, 40s and 50s, even late 40s, early 50s, was what we were doing here in the U.S., right, to empower workers to be more effective in defense manufacturing. We actually created little instruction cards and good standard operating procedures, et cetera, and they took that to Japan and they built that out. But one of the things about their culture I found pretty interesting is this thing around mistakes, right? So many cultures we tend to be punitive, right? Oh, a defect was made, or, a shipment was late, or whatever. And we're like, okay, so who's to blame, right?
Yeah.
And then, but they take different form or different, mindset from a leadership perspective of, oh, what did we do as leaders to fail the organization, to fail our people in not taking the steps we need to do to help them prevent it, to empower them to get out in front of it? We'd take it as a management cost if there was a defect, and it's a challenge on us as leaders to what do we do to go out and engage with folks and help them come up with a better process for the future. Does that resonate with you, or would you take a different slant at that?
No, that completely resonates with me, Deming and Duran. Okay. I mean, it's even what they did with Ford. I think it was Deming that turned Ford around. Okay. They hired him because Deming and Duran, America didn't want to listen to him. So they had to go to Japan.
Right.
Okay. And that's where they did it. And I totally believed in that, helping them. It's how do I help them succeed? I am 100% behind that. Okay. Yeah, but and again, I one of the things I always would say, even with talking to the managers, I says, they'd come with a problem. And I said, well, what are we going to do to fix? What are we going to do to prevent this? Okay. And I said, well, you have to talk to the person, this, that, and the other thing they would say. I says, no, you don't. I says, let me ask you a question. Are they trained properly? Okay. Do they have the right procedures? Do they have the right tools? Do they have the right parts? And I said, once you eliminate all them, I'll let you go for the person. I'm not saying the person might be the problem, but it's going to be the last problem. Okay. I want to make sure everything else is taken care of. Once they're taken care of, we can talk about it. So I mean, there was a time, this goes back to digitizing. We were digitizing pages. And in order to effectively make money, we had to do 1,800 good images on a shift, pages. Okay. So I even met with the team and I said, look, I need 1,800 good images. Then I don't really care what you do, but they got to be good. I said, and they're going to be inspected tonight. So if I get only 1,770 tomorrow, you have to fix those 30 and you owe me 1,800. And I said, if you do that, I don't care. So there was this one guy that would give me like 2,200 images a day and like almost all good. And the HR person came to me and said, well, you need to talk to Joe. Why do I need to talk to Joe? He said, well, occasionally he extends his breaks long when he goes on morning break. I said, so? Well, you can't do that. I said, does he go a long time? No. How about, does he do it every day? No. I said, well, then I'm not talking to him. I says, well, you have to. I says, no, I don't. I says, I was never here to manage his time. I says, he made a commitment to the company to make money for the company and do a quality job and not, affect other people. If it was affecting other people, I would have a problem. So I said, you can go to it was a privately owned company. I said, you can go to the owner of the company. I says, I'm still not talking to him. I says, why do I want to kick off this guy when he's doing, if everybody did that, I said, I don't even care if they go home after 7 hours. Okay. But so that's what I'm coming with that one. Okay.
All right.
So
Great story. Jim, anything else you would share as advice from all of your experience? It's not easy to go Google it. You've got to experience and know how to do it. What else would you suggest, if anything, before we get into wrap up?
what else would I suggest? Well, here's what it is. I'll tell you how I learned. Okay. I learned a lot from my mistakes. So don't be afraid to make a mistake. And I would tell you, if you make a mistake, go to the people and honestly tell them you made a mistake. And maybe they will help you. But then I always listened to the experience of others. I always did. Okay. I would, the people would make me comments and it's like, I didn't catch it. I didn't get it. It took me 2 years later. I know what he was trying to tell me. Okay. And the other thing is read books. I do. Okay. I read books to see how people do it. I read all the Steve Covey books, Principle First and, the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. I read so many of these books that helped me. From the technical side, I wasn't worried because I was an engineer. So I kind of figured a lot of things out. Okay. And so, it was more of the emotional intelligence. Okay. And I read a lot of the books. Even right now, I'm reading some of the things of Bill Belichick of how he built his team. And it's really amazing of, how he did it to build his teams, listening to these people, because and you need superstars out there. You got to go out there and, the one piece of advice, you can read all the books you want, but remember one thing. If you want change, I want you to go to the mirror because you need to change that person before you want other people to change. So if you change your techniques, you will get other people to change. But if you want them to change because you're telling them and dictating it, good luck with that. Okay. So you can't Google all this stuff together. Okay. I have a lifetime of experiences in my books, and I even have stories in those books. So,
All right. So, Jim, that's a perfect pivot. So if they want to get in touch, tell us a little bit more about your books. And then if people want to brainstorm with you, pick your brain a little bit, how do they get in touch with you? So tell us a bit more about your books and then tell us how to get in touch with you.
okay. Well, I kind of worked it backwards. My first book I ever wrote was, correction versus prevention, because I know prevention fixes it. And I'm going back in there and, I was talking to people and this and that. And I says, what the problem is, you don't have the right culture. Okay. So you can't, so I went back and said, well, you know what? I have to start really explaining to people how to change the culture. So that's why I went and wrote the book on culture. But in order to do that, you have to have the right leaders. Okay. And I have been an advocate for the last 30 years of putting the leader in leadership, because I laugh at some of these places like I LinkedIn. They give you a lot of quotes. Okay, quotes are great, but how do you do it? How do you become a leader? Okay, and so I wrote that, and they all tie together. Okay, I don't think I can tell you to buy one piece and says it puts the whole thing together. Okay, because I think you need the right leaders to change the culture, to make prevention over correction. Because you know what? If you get the prevention over correction, like Deming and Duran and all these companies, Toyota and everything like that, where you save, a lot of money, you get people engaged, you get them happy. They're happy to work with you. Okay. You got it made. But they all, there's no one magic bullet. Okay.
No, there never is. There
So
never is.
you have to take the whole thing. And as far as getting in contact with me, easily, I have, a website there with the Zelem trilogy as Utilization Management University. It talks about the Zelem trilogy there. But I also, if you want to get in contact with me, my email is Jim at you are just a number, but that's the letter U and R, and then just a number.com. So you can get
Letter U, letter R, just a number.com.
Yeah, the letter U, the letter R, just a number.com. And I guarantee you, I will get back to you. Even if I come back, hey, I got your message, give me a little bit to think about it and resonate on it, and I'll get back to you. But anybody that gets back, wants to contact me, I'd be more than willing to help, because, actually at my age, I'm more retired, and I actually want to take my experience and help others become better. Let's work together about making tomorrow better.
Awesome. Jim, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it, Ron.
All right. Thank you. So again, thank you for joining us for this episode of Metapod. Be sure to like it. Be sure to share it with your friends. Follow it. And that'll help us, increase our listenership, our watchers, so that we can bring more of this great thought leadership to everybody in the world that can benefit from. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining Metapod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.